Today, with help along the way, we have John Stryker Meyer. So welcome, John.
Welcome. Good to be here, Ed. Thank you.
Yes, it's good to have you. Folks, for people that don't know, John Stryker Meyer, he is an author of a book called Across the Fence, The Secret War in Vietnam. We'll get into that a little bit later. But I wanted to have him on this call with us to talk about current events, specifically Ukraine and Russia. And we know from recent history, Ukraine celebrated 30-year anniversary of independence, 30 years, right? And now, almost some short period of time later, they're being invaded. They are in full-scale war, right? Lots of tragedy. It's becoming almost a genocide situation, it seems like. Just so much murder, so much mayhem. And the tricky part is it seems to be the leadership of Russia has convinced a number of people to invade, right, and start this war. And so Ukraine is an independent country. It goes back over 1,000 years. Kiev, I think, was a city before many of the cities in Europe were already in existence, specifically, in the U.S. where we are. So that's kind of the backdrop of this. And I wanted to get your thoughts, John, on Ukraine. So you've been in war. You're a Vietnam veteran. You were in special forces, specifically MACV-SOG, which is little known to the world, and it's just now coming to light several years later. And so there's this privilege I have in speaking with you. But when you come across a situation like this, knowing your background, what are your thoughts on the situation in terms of Russia and Ukraine, and how that plays out?
Well, in this case here, don't forget, in the Vietnam War was a proxy war for Russia, too.
Yes.
Because they supplied hundreds of jets over the course of time. More than 3,000 Russians fought in the Russian secret war. And they provided training for MiGs. They trained their anti-aircraft personnel to shoot down our aircraft and our helicopters, anything like that. So what I find interesting today, or ironic, I guess, is, we're supporting the Ukraine, and Russia's going, oh no, you can't do that. Don't be involved in this proxy war. But
yes.
Oh, it was okay when you did it in Vietnam. It was okay when you did it, overran Czechoslovakia in 1968, overran Hungary in 1956, and recently, of course, with Chechnya and the Crimea. So they don't care about that. Of course, they're just, everybody has to remember the basic tenet about communism. They'll lie to get to where they want to go. And So with that, today, seeing what's going on, it's amazing. And I find it heartwarming that the Ukrainians, with some assistance from the allies in NATO, are really handing it back to the Russians. And I think there's some key components here. First and foremost is the Ukrainian people themselves, their valor. They're fighting for their country. And like you said, it's interesting because some people forget they've only been a country on their own for 30 years. And that's a critical thing. Now there's imagine America 30 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. We were full of piss and vinegar back then and fighting.
Yes.
And we still had a few battles up with the English, like the Battle of New Orleans, which was basically 40 years later. But that still happened because we were a sovereign nation. So here's the Ukraine today, a sovereign nation, fighting, even though they're destroying Mariupol, brick by brick, building by building, the way Russia does it. And people forget this is socialism and communism at its most brutal front. And here in America today, we have so many people that are socialists that pretend to care about America when they don't. So it's a double-edged sword there, I think, for anybody to look at it and to really look carefully at it.
Yeah, and it seems like the people that want to do the right thing are stuck in the middle between the two blades, right? And they're coming closer and closer. As you talked about, they have this proxy methodology every so many years of picking up territories or picking up henchmen, right, to do the dirty work and set up puppet governments and take over again, right? And so I had a conversation a little over a year ago with a gentleman, a Finnish gentleman, and we were talking about the Winter War and then the continuation war in Russia or in Finland by the Russian army and how they attacked them again. And basically, his thought was, we kind of got lucky. We had some great moments and a very strong, proud nation. Everyone was involved, from the women to the children. All generations to make this happen. But he said, we kind of got lucky. And I said, well, I don't know how you think of it that way, but Finland stopped the spread of communism into the Western area, right? They stopped them, right?
Oh yeah.
And so that seems, it was like a David and Goliath situation again, right? So they stopped them and sent them back, right? And it's unfortunate because Finland had to give up some of their territory at the time, specifically the Karelia region. And so now, as we're talking through, bringing up some of these historical points, one of the topics that I've come across very recently from actual Ukrainian people that are, communicating with me online is like, hey, we have not forgotten our history, right? History has continued to be taught with us, through us, to us, since we were young children, right? We do not forget our history. That's
Right.
why we're fighting so hard. We're not going to roll over and play dead just because some guy wants us, to eradicate us or to raise our country. We're not going to let that happen. And so there's the dichotomy, or the complete opposite, as you talked about, the people that pretend to care and the people that really do, right? And so how do you, merge those two in society? And it seems, well, we know, and the fact is, social media can be weaponized. Right?
Of course.
Electrons and little images and pictures and phrases and recordings can be weaponized. And so, we're talking about, Ukraine, how that is impacting them. And I think they're doing a great job based on what I've seen and knowing some about war history and how that works, right? But, what are your thoughts based on your experience in fighting the communists? You were fighting in the thick of it, in the jungles, and in places unknown to the world. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And then how can that translate to the people in today's terms?
Yeah, in our case, it was the North Vietnamese army was funded, and the weapons were given to them by Russia and other Eastern Bloc countries and China a little bit. And so the North Vietnamese they were told we were there to conquer their country. We weren't. We were there to fight communism, but they never heard that side of the story. So when they came down and attacked us, because our job, we were just trying to find out what they were doing. We didn't want to go to battle or war. We were just happy to take some pictures of their supply trucks moving south, give reports. And so today with the Ukrainians, I think that the Russian troops that are going in, a lot of them are conscription, first and foremost. They're not career guys. Secondly, they were lied to about what the mission was. They keep, Putin and his, the people under him keep saying, oh, no, we're going in for bogus reasons, like the United States has biochem labs, or he keeps inventing new reasons, which are false flags, bullshit. But the people under him don't know because they control the media. There's no First Amendment in Russia. And who knows how much internet they get. I don't know. I'm very ignorant of this. I've stayed away from it.
It's a lot less nowadays.
Indeed. But I think that to the question, we have conscripts that are now invading the Ukraine, and they're fighting a tenacious force in the Ukrainian people that don't want to give up their sovereignty. So NATO, which involves the U.S. giving some weapons, maybe not enough, but they have some, And we also have some special operations troops that have been there before training Ukrainians. What the exact status is today, I don't know. I can't say. But based on my experience and based on recent postings on social media, there are Green Berets that have retired that are going back to the Ukraine. One is Ryan Hendrickson. He wrote a book called Tip of the Spear.
Yes.
And when he was deployed to Afghanistan, an IED took off one of his legs. He goes back, gets a prosthesis, trains up, gets back into the Army, gets back in the Special Forces, and went back to Afghanistan for 2 tours of duty. Well, he just recently posted something on Instagram showing him going into the Ukraine with live video from him going in. So we have people like Ryan that are there behind the scenes, quietly working with the Ukrainian people, training them on how to use the Stinger missiles, the anti-tank weapons,
right.
and other improvised ways to attack the supply lines. Because in the beginning of the invasion, the general media was going, oh, look at them. They've been there for 8 days. Well, there's a reason. And nobody's been able to document it. But my suspicion is the Ukrainian people, maybe with some help from special operators from not only the United States, but maybe the United Kingdom, or people like Ryan, who they kicked ass and took numbers when they were in the Army and Special Forces. And now they're going in to work with the Ukrainian people to protect their country against communism, period.
You're talking about your experience when you were in Asia, right?
Yeah.
And there's instances where you had very close contact with the enemy, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so the enemy at that point were the North Koreans invading into South Korea. I'm sorry, North Vietnam invading into South Vietnam. And so you're fighting North Vietnamese, but at any point were you fighting actual Russians? Or do you know?
Well, we saw Russians. I literally heard them on the radio when they would do aerial resupplies in Laos to their people stationed in Laos. We had other guys that have seen Russians. We had a Marine Corps helicopter pilot who saw a uniformed Russian in the DMZ. By the time he turned around his helicopter to go back to light him up with a couple of rockets, the Russian ran into the jungle. So we know they were there, and there is a YouTube presentation on the Russian secret war in Vietnam, where they had a reunion 15 or 20 years ago talking about the 3,000 plus men that had their secret war. So we had our secret war with SOG. And again, I think the North Vietnamese army that we came up against, they really believed from the propaganda and the lies that they were told by the communists running the North Vietnamese government that we were like the French. We were there to take their country. It wasn't true at all. But we didn't get a chance to sit down and talk like you and I say, hey, my name's John Meyer, and you're News and Confusion from North Vietnam. We're not here. We just don't want communism south of the DMZ.
Yeah.
And the other similarity, the South Vietnamese men on my recon team, they knew their government was corrupt. And I don't know about the extent of the Ukrainian government and corruption prior to the invasion. I've heard scuttlebutt. I know nothing directly. However, the parallel would be the South Vietnamese on my recon team were willing to die fighting communism than to live under communism. They knew about the corrupt government that they lived with, and they preferred to live with a corrupt government that they knew, as opposed to living under the thumb of communism. And there's a parallel there in the Ukraine today. I'm not sure about the Ukrainian government and corruption prior to President Zelensky getting in office. Right. I'm told there was some issues. Again, I don't know. However, the parallel is the Ukrainians are like my South Vietnamese. They're willing to die for their government, their country, and that ground, rather than be under the thumb of communism. And people better understand that, because in America we have this whole socialism thing, and people talking about and bringing about socialistic ideas that are empty promises and are fortified with lies, as opposed to having truth, which would be like the Ukrainian people saying, we don't want communism, go back to Moscow, leave us alone, let us run our country.
Yeah, that's true. And, in learning some about you from our previous conversation and getting started in the book, you worked with the South Vietnamese and you trained them. You were there side by side, training them, being their leader, right? So you've seen the memes or the pictures of the leader, two different leaders, right? So there's one leader that's at the back whipping people, right? And then there's one leader at the front with his people behind or beside him. So you're the guy in the front, right, with the people beside and behind him in South Vietnam. Now, tell us about the training. How can your training affect a group of people, right? And what is that effect called?
Well, it's a force multiplier, so that we train. In our case, we had 9 or 10 South Vietnamese with 3 Green Berets. Later on, when I took over the team, we eventually had myself and another American, Bubba Shore, then later Lynn Black. When I came home after my tour of duty, Lynn Black became the team leader, and Doug, the Frenchman Letourneau, was his assistant team leader. But they worked with the same South Vietnamese, so they trained them. And then when other teams formed up, our team, with the experience, would at least talk to the others to tell them and try to help them. And I think that, like in a traditional Green Beret camp, there'd be 12 Green Berets, and they would work with 100, 200, 300 indigenous people. They would teach them basics, but also how to use a weapon, defend themselves, and over time broaden their combative skills so that they could defend themselves against communism. And the force multiplier, in this case, you'd have like 2 or 3 Americans working with a handful of South Vietnamese who could work with other Vietnamese against the communists. And in Ukraine, we have our people on the ground where they're training handfuls of Ukrainians who then go out and train 2 dozen. And that 2 dozen goes out and gets 4 dozen. Before you know, you got 100. Then you got 200. And they're doing everything. I mean, some of the pictures that came out early on showed the Ukrainian people training on basic combat maneuvers with wooden AK-47s just to get used to how to handle it, how to move, how to get down on one knee. Yeah. And that's the way they can fight. And again, think about it from a common sense perspective. If you're standing on your property and there's a communist dog from Russia who's trying to push you off your property, you're going to stand there and fight until you kill those communists and get them the hell out, or you're going to die on your property defending it. There's a different motivation here between conscripts and lying officials from Russia pushing conscripts into a country who basically, I think that if they sat down and had a beer with the Ukrainians, they would go, wait a minute, this is your country. You guys really like it here. And maybe I like it here better than I do in Russia.
Yes. And I think you probably have seen some of those true instances surface recently of some of them like, you know what? I'm switching sides. Right.
Well, there's been a couple of reports. Now, again, I'm dealing with tertiary information here. It's not even secondary. And but yes, that if any of that's accurate, and I believe it, I think that you get the basic, even a Russian that's had no education, he's a conscript, but if he gets across the line and sees his fellow Russians getting killed by men and women who are standing up to defend their property. At some point, they might be saying to themselves, maybe I'm on the wrong side here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. You know, as I think about what you're saying, and you're right, if someone, I guess because we have had the freedom of thought, we have been allowed to think freely, right? And we have the ability to express ourselves in music and books and reading and writing, whereas the communist society says no, right? This is how it's going to be. If you're going to do anything, it's within what I tell you, right? Here's your list of books, or here's your list of movies, and that's it, right? They close off the world, and they just make it impossible, right? So I guess what we can do is consider this chapter 1, right, of this conversation. But, you know, as I'm privileged to have a copy of this book, Across the Fence, The Secret War in Vietnam, there's lots of lessons in here. But what lesson from the book, John, would you share with listeners and viewers of this first chapter of our discussion that the Ukrainians could benefit from, right, if they're not experiencing it already?
Well, I think that the Ukrainians are experiencing the fact that there are people willing to support them either clandestinely or overtly. I mean, we have NATO, we have all the politicians talk, but we have that common experience of that going on. And I think that from our book, like in my case, I was green and came into South Vietnam, had to earn the respect of my people. So I think that the people who are coming in to help the Ukrainians, they have to earn the Ukrainian people's respect also.
Yes.
But something's going right there, because good old Putin thought he was going to march in and have dinner in Kiev in a couple of days. Ixnay on that. The Ukrainians had a different idea.